Few ancient texts spark as much modern outrage as the Manusmriti. In 1927, copies of the manuscript were publicly burned by civil rights leader Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to protest its rules segregating the lower castes, known as Shudras, and stripping autonomy from women. These protests rest on a common assumption that ancient Hindu kings used this text as a binding, literal constitution to rule their empires. But modern historical scholarship tells a different story. There is zero evidence that the Manusmriti was ever actively administered as a legal code by any ancient Indian state. The journey from an obscure, ancient manuscript to an active instrument of systemic oppression is actually a story of modern misinterpretation. Between 200 BCE and 200 CE, the Manusmriti emerged as a Dharmaśāstra, a theoretical discourse on morals, virtues, and duties, rather than a book of statutory law. It was an idealized guide written by and for the priestly and warrior classes, describing how they believed society ought to behave. The text contains internal contradictions regarding women, demanding they be revered as goddesses, while also demanding their total lifelong subjugation to male relatives. Zooming out, it was just one node among dozens of competing, often more practical texts, like the Yajnavalkya Smriti. For over 1,000 years, Indian society operated on flexible, regional customs, while the Manusmriti remained a dense, contradictory academic exercise. In the 18th century, the British East India Company took control, suddenly facing the need to cheaply and efficiently govern millions of non-Muslim subjects. The British had already codified a system of Islamic law for Muslims, and they sought a singular, standardized Hindu law book to apply uniformly across the rest of the population. In 1794, Sir William Jones translated a highly flawed version of the Manusmriti, believing he had found India's missing constitution. Colonial administrators viewed the world through the lens of European positive law, rigid, binding statutes enforced by a state. They misread a fluid, philosophical meditation on morality as a strict penal code. The colonial government imposed this translation upon the population, officially replacing complex, evolving local customs with bureaucratic legal rulings based on a single book. By forcing a disjointed manuscript into the shape of a European constitution, the British manufactured a centralized Hindu law where none had existed before. This Anglo-Hindu law fiction allowed colonial courts to cherry-pick the most rigid, patriarchal, and caste-based verses from the translation to serve as literal law. A fluid social web was locked into a rigid pyramid structure.
Applying the text as law, the British Brahmanized Indian society, institutionalizing the marginalization of the Shudras. Look at the bottom layers being padlocked. Women found their autonomy frozen to match the most restrictive interpretations. These 19th century colonial edicts dictated inheritance, marriage, and property rights in the actual streets and markets of British India, fundamentally altering daily life and commerce for millions. The lasting trauma of the Manusmriti serves as a cautionary tale of how an empire can flatten an ancient text, weaponizing it for state control.